welcome back to another episode of Filthy Hope. If it's your first time, for whatever reason, welcome. We're so glad you joined us today. Our mission statement here at Filthy Hope is we just dive into the grey spaces where Jesus, life, and culture intersect, wherever that takes us. I'm your host, Jonty, and I'm joined by Rev Ness, as always.
How are you?
I'm okay. People that listened last week will know that I've had a bout of illness that doesn't seem to go away.
Still bugging you, man.
Yeah, so apologies, my voice is still a bit croaky today, but we'll push through. Like last week, if I do have a coughing fit, you won't hear it because it'll be edited out.
That's right.
Yeah.
But look at where we're coming from today, Jonty.
That's right.
It looks like it's the Mattel set prior to Christmas.
Those that are watching will see a large collection of memorabilia behind us. We're shooting from another studio today, which is where Top Year regularly record. So if you don't know what Top Year is, what a great question to ask. Top Year is if you like history, but also like having a laugh, Top Year is another podcast that I produce. Actually, it's partly funded by Uniting Heart and Soul and Filthy Hope, because when we upgraded all of our gear, this is our secondary studio, which is where we're recording today, and we've recorded episodes with James Watson, and we've recorded here before with Karen Mitchell-Lambert.
Yeah, it's really handy.
The Will Giacometti episode was shot here, so it's a good little secondary location when you're in the neighbourhood and we go, let's record today, and we just drop in here. So
handy.
So if you're getting bored, just have a look at the large spread of in-joke memorabilia from Top Year.
So cool.
Where are we going today, Ness? You're kind of leading this one off this week.
Yeah, look, it's super interesting. It's something we've really wanted to talk about for a while, and it's been born out of a subject that I'm doing at uni this semester for my master's.
Yep.
And it's a practical theology subject, and it's where we take a theological discipline like hermeneutics or systematic theology, and we start to unpack it practically. That's how I understand it. I'm only 2 weeks in, so maybe, I hope I got that right. And I've just read the first book that we've been asked to read by Thomas G. Long, and it's called What Shall We Say? On Evil, Suffering and the Crisis of Faith. So I thought that would be a top little question, because isn't it the situation when bad stuff happens in the world, people often say, well, where was God in that? Isn't that right? Isn't that a thing? Well, if there's a God, why is there evil suffering in the world? If God's not all powerful, why did the tsunami wipe out all these people? Why did 9/11 happen? Why are children dying? If there's a God in the world, why is there hunger for people all over the planet, etc.? Why do bad things happen?
There's a famous clip of Stephen Fry, so I hesitate to call him a celebrity atheist because he's so much more, like, he's done so many things, but he's an atheist, and someone asked him, like, well, if you're wrong and you die and you find yourself at the pearly gates, what do you say to God? Yeah. And his answer is, how dare you? Like, bone cancer in children? What's the deal with that?
Yeah.
And his whole thing is exactly this. Like, if all this bad stuff happens in the world, what if God is God, then what's God's place in that? How much responsibility does God have for things like natural disasters and diseases that kill children and helpless people and all of those? Yeah, that's like the nature of that question of, like, well, if there's suffering and God is good,
can there be both?
At first glance, how do you square that equation?
Correct, that's right. So this book attempts to, I think, help pastors and lay leaders and ministers to wrestle with what do you say when we're asked these questions on evil and suffering, because you can come up with all the platitudes in the world, can't you, to explain away cancer, and none of it's helpful, and actually it's really unhelpful to open your mouth often.
Especially when you're talking to people who are immediately affected by whatever the issue is.
Yeah, exactly right. So you're better off to just have a ministry of presence and say nothing than sprout out some, dumb thing that hurts people further, when they're already angry.
Happened for a reason.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
What sort of reason justifies
grandma dying
This
of
person
cancer
dying
and
at
struggling.
50, yeah.
Correct, yeah. So this book, it's really provocative because where it starts, it sort of kicks off with this really incredible event that happened in 1755 in Portugal. It's called the Lisbon earthquake. And it is absolutely devastating because what happened was it was All Saints' Day, the 1st of November, and apparently in Lisbon at the time there was per capita more monks and priests living in Lisbon than anywhere else in the world at the time. So it's a real hot seat of Catholicism. And so they're celebrating All Saints' Day on the 1st of November. It's like 9:30 church, everybody's in church, and this earthquake erupts. Buildings collapse, people perish, a fire breaks out in this city that lasts for days, and the people think that they're going to run to safety. They run to the harbour where they assume they're going to get safety with their children and their young people and trying to escape this earthquake. I think it was like an 8 on the Richter, so it was a big one, might have even been a little bit more than that. And they get down to the water only to find this massive tsunami. They hop into boats and they drown. People drown. So tens of thousands of people died. It was an absolute disaster. And the world changed after this Lisbon event. The moment that it started to spread throughout Europe that this event had taken place, it probably took several weeks to get the snail mail in the day to the different continents to find out about this. They started to question, well, where is God? Can I read you something?
Yeah, please.
He says this: if a volcano erupts, is this an act of God or simply the consequence of the build-up of gases? If people were killed by the flow of lava, is this divine punishment, the operation of the indifferent laws of nature, or something else? After the Enlightenment, wondering why God doesn't intervene to stop suffering led inevitably to wondering if there even was a God to intervene at all. So it was an absolute juncture in time where people prior to this event, they were in their medieval theological thinking that God is all good and he is he is the master of all of creation and earthquakes and if we're good people and we love him, nothing bad will happen to us. It was a really quite a, they call it a medieval theology.
Yep.
And then from this point on, 1755, post-Lisbon, they started to think more like rationally, and science was a part of the equation, and this is what we call the Enlightenment period. And that changed how we theologically looked at things.
Is a part of that because you mentioned at the beginning that there was such a high concentration of religious leadership in that location where that happened as well, because it was like this didn't just happen, not this is from their perspective.
I'm hearing you.
But like it didn't just happen to anyone, quote unquote. This happened to like
the
religious centre.
Yeah, exactly. Major religious centre of the day.
Okay, yeah.
And Catholic.
Yeah.
Like I think 1 in 10, I hope I got that information right, was a priest or a monk.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
Or a nun. So that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And people perished. They perished. People loving God, you know. He says this: how could there be a God who is a loving and just in a world of evil and suffering? So it's a big question, isn't it? Do you have any blush thoughts? It's such a provocative thing to discuss. I
mean, this it's anyone that is interested in faith, whether or not you're a person of faith. But if you think about the idea of God long enough, this is like an inevitable question that you run into. So much so that I'm sure the term Theodicy is going to show up a bunch as we get into this. But like, there's a name for this exact area of discussion and debate, which is trying to rationalize the seeming contradiction between God being all loving and all powerful. I remember my good little youth group nerd brain leaping for joy when I was in the cinema watching Batman vs Superman back in, I would have been in year 11 maybe. Terrible movie, like it's horrendous. But they explicitly address, because obviously Superman is a traditionally has been for a long time in American pop culture almost like the most explicit analogy for God being the all-powerful, and then they're able to wrestle with like, well, if Superman is good and has all of this power, how do you reconcile Superman not being able to save everyone? And so there's lots of stuff that you can over the history of particularly Superman in the DC universe. But Lex Luthor in that movie explicitly says to Superman, like, well, if God is all good, then God cannot be all powerful, and if God is all powerful, then God cannot be all good. And that's a very like class 101 entry into Theodicy, where it's like it's one or the other. Whereas part of where it gets complex and why this is something that literally has its own name as an area of discussion is because there's so much nuance and grey in the middle, where it's not just one or the other, it's how you actually integrate those two truths. But then I would say on top of that, you're also able to pick apart both of those two statements in and of themselves. Is God all good? That's a question that lots of people ask.
Yep.
And is God all powerful? I spoke to theologian Thomas J. Ord recently about, he's written a whole book called God Can't, which is his way of rationalizing, well, if God is all good and all of this bad stuff happens to people, then his way of rationalizing that is, well, maybe God has made God's self unable to step in and stop these things because of because of God's nature being love. So there's so many different ways that you can rationalize it and compare and contrast and blend and synthesize those two ideas.
There's
what have you got for us?
There's one theologian that says this, Ehrmans is his name, and he says, this is his list of God and innocent suffering truth claims. He says this: there is a God, God is all powerful, God is loving and good, and there is innocent suffering. So God is all those things.
Yeah.
I just love how we try and be the mind of God and try and work it out. This is what Christians try to do. We try to reduce God to a single thing.
You want to be able to understand it.
Yeah.
And say, got it all in a box.
Yeah, I've
wrapped my head around that.
I know. Yeah. I know you, God. I've got this completely sorted. Maybe God doesn't want us to completely know. Maybe he does enjoy and giggle at our wrestle.
It's almost like there's a story at the beginning of the Bible about knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge.
Exactly. I in my notes on that, I think we totally stuffed it. I think that's where we completely stuffed it, was in the garden.
Yeah.
Everything was going fine until we,
I think
got into the whole fruit salad
that in
piece.
and of itself is a conversation that we should have on this show about diving into that creation story in the fall. Because I think there's so much in there that you kind of you take for granted as a Christian. It's like, that's a story, whether or not how literally you take it to be as history or parable or but we don't dive into it very often.
No.
So that in and of itself, maybe not today we can pin that,
one.
but like that around
I agree.
The tree of good and evil and knowledge and whatever it's called. You probably remember better
that's
than I
good.
do,
That's 100% right. I think the idea of one of the theological positions on this in this topic of evil and suffering and is there God is we're as much to blame. Humanity is, we point the finger at God, say, well, why can't you fix it all? But we are very much to blame, right? I think about, have you been to San Francisco?
No, I haven't.
It's a beautiful city. I've been there many times. It's really amazing. And
is that where Rob would take you to watch the Top Gun planes?
No, that's San Diego.
San Diego, sorry, I'm getting my sands mixed up.
Yeah, that's it. So San Francisco is the city above Los Angeles and it's terrific. And the San Andreas fault line goes, I believe, from there all the way down to LA. It goes all the way down and through. Anyway, massive fault line. And when the next big earthquake happens over in that part of the neck of the woods, where those tectonic plates erupt, it's going to be catastrophic. Now, people build on these fault lines. They know they're there. I've stopped and looked at them. Dr. Frank Vernon, leading seismologist in the world, good mate with my husband. We've got out of the car on the way to skiing, and he's stopped and shown me different areas where the fault line is, and there's full towns set up along here, you know, and fancy real estate. We don't learn. We continue to build on these areas.
I wonder how much of that is like, oh, it won't happen in my lifetime, so I don't care.
Well, it has happened in the last 100 years in LA and in that part of the world, and they continue to build there. It's a little bit like what's just happened in Lismore. We've got floods happening from Cyclone Alfred, and that place continues to flood. Yet we go, let's rebuild in that floodland and not correct the path of the water, or it just feels ridiculous. And then we go, oh, but God's all powerful and God shouldn't have made that earthquake happen. Yet the earth and creation has been a evolving life force since the beginning of time.
Oh, and human activity and like modern civilization is
we're new to the game.
Blip,
yeah,
compared to
totally.
Yeah.
So the world and the tectonic plates have to coincide with humanity for us all to survive. We need those plates to rub up against each other to do what they need to do with the volcanoes. The volcanoes need to erupt so that they can provide the most rich, beautiful soil and nutrient. Yeah. If you think about Nepal, now Mount Vesuvius erupted, and that was Pompeii, I believe. Boy, I hope I've got this history right. Is that about right?
Source, trust me.
And if you think about the tomatoes that come out of Napoli, they're some of the most magnificent tomatoes in the entire world that were built from and off, grown out of the beautiful organic volcanic soil that was produced from that volcano over time. Boy, I hope I've got that information right. But we need nature to continue to do what nature does. We need the storms. We need the volcanic activity. We need the world to continue to evolve and to move and to flex itself, because I believe there's nothing wrong here. My theology says that God created it beautifully. God created it all. He said it was perfect and it was done. You know, it was a good day. It was good, he said, and he rested.
He said it's very good.
Very good, mate. So it was designed to move and flex. I think our problem is we think there's a problem when it moves and flexes. We go, shit, there's a tornado coming. What do we call them? Cyclone. There's a cyclone coming and, wow, batten down the hatches, people might die. I'm going, mate, we live in these areas. We choose to live there. We choose to build in these places where they're a hotbed for the earth's flex and stretch and growth. The groanings of the world will continue because I think God made it that way. I don't think there's anything wrong here. Yet we, as humans, are so up ourselves. I think we go, well, you know, I think there's some people, I think there's a problem here. There can't possibly be a God because shit's going down, you know?
Yeah. That's interesting because that aligns a little bit with my, like, I'm a bit of a closet nihilist.
Yeah, you've said that before.
Yeah, like I do kind of, and I don't have any like scripture to back this up. It's really just a personal thing, but I really do kind of have this sense of like to put it succinctly, shit happens.
Yeah.
And there's like random chance is a very real force in the world. And we're so quick, like you say, to rush to the like pointing fingers at God when sometimes like shit just happens. And I think when we talk about things like natural disasters, like you say, like a lot of it is down to just how the world operates, like how the biosphere and how natural order and how the environment operates. But where it gets tricky and where this question, where the rubber hits the road is, like you mentioned, Alfred, you know, it's very easy to have a conversation about, let's Hurricane Katrina. Is probably one of the most, I hesitate to use the word memorable, but like notable natural disasters in this country, probably in the last 50 years. There'll be a few others maybe, but where the rubber hits the road then is like, it's very easy to step back and go, yeah, hurricanes are a thing. That's just like how the world operates and weather patterns and versus having a one-on-one conversation with a family that lost someone in the hurricane, for example. So it really depends on like your focal point.
So theologically, you would never say to somebody who's just lost their family in Hurricane Katrina, oh, well, that's just the earth flexing and groaning.
Shouldn't
and
have
God
lived
created
there,
it. God created it this way. And what will you do? You know, blame the victim. Oh, and you chose to live there because, right. I mean, that's failed practical theology 101, isn't it?
It's lacking basic human empathy.
Totally. Yeah.
But even before you get to anything theological, it's like,
100%.
Yeah.
That's right. In this book he talks about, there's a Scottish philosopher called David Hume, and he says this, is God willing to prevent evil but he's not able? That's one of the questions.
Yeah, which is that's a lot of what Thomas J. Ord, who I mentioned earlier, that's part of his theology, is that because God's nature is love, God's love compels God to not be able to control what humans do because God loves so deeply that he is unable to step in and control those things. So,
and if God was to eradicate all evil per se, then we'd all get wiped off the face of the planet, wouldn't we? Because none of us are lacking evil. We're all sinful bastards. Everybody.
That's what the new heaven and new earth will look like. But until then,
we're stuffed. So God really, if God was to eliminate all evil, we'd all have to go, and then there'd be nobody.
Hence Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why salvation is a thing.
He says, is God able to prevent evil but not willing?
And that's where someone like a Stephen Fry steps in and goes, well, if that's the case, I don't want to bar it.
Yeah.
That's a God who is like pernicious and not worthy of worship if God is able to but decides not to. That's where a lot of atheism, the atheist side of Theodicy leans on if God is able to and just decides not to. However, whatever that reason is, however noble or theologically correct or nice sounding it is, God's still deciding to let children die, deciding to let cancer run rampant, deciding to let suffering happen. And that's where a lot of agnostics and atheists and even Christians, to be honest, even theists go, I have an issue with that.
I think about our responsibility to the suffering, and remember those children. I've talked about it before. It must really have hit me hard. That family of children, cousins and siblings, they were at a family gathering down in Dundas, and a drunk, stoned driver, young driver in a four-wheel drive. The kids were coming home with ice creams. They're on their bikes and he just ploughed into them and wiped, I think, 4 of them out, killed 4 instant little children. I think to myself, where is the evil in that? Is the evil in, like, God? We know that God wouldn't want that. If God is love, God does not want those little children to die, you know? But likewise, if God is love, God doesn't want the young man behind the wheel of a car driving fast under the influence of drugs and alcohol.
And also God doesn't want him to live the rest of his life with that incredible burden.
Pain.
Having
Yeah.
wiped out a family. Yeah.
But what happened to him, the driver, to lead him to get behind the wheel, drunk and off his face? What was going on in his life that was potentially, was it just party? Was it party drugs and he was having a out of control party moment? Was there trauma going on for him that might have come from a trauma background as a kid, and therefore he got in his dad's four-wheel drive and got smashed and just thought, fuck it, I'm out of here, I don't care, and just drove with total abandon and off he went? Where there's evil in all of that, isn't there? It's just like a string of bad events that lead to that event.
And it's like the further and further you zoom out, the more you realise you can't just isolate and remove one thing.
Yeah. Have you watched the Menendez brothers Netflix series?
I haven't. I've been meaning to.
It's a doco, isn't it? Yeah. I haven't watched it either. My daughters have told me about it. I can't bear to do it.
I think from memory it's a...
Is it
dramatic,
docudrama?
It's a dramatic recreation.
That's right, because they're in jail.
It's the same as, it's like part of the series. I think, I'll correct myself in post if I'm wrong, but it's the creators and it's a follow-on from the previous one, which was the Jeffrey Dahmer one.
Right, yeah, okay.
Which was obviously a dramatic recreation. So
I find all that really heavy, super heavy, but the reason I bring it up is because they killed their mum and their dad, brutally killed their mother and their father. Yeah. And we're only just, because of this docudrama, starting to understand more about one of the sons. And we've found out that and correct me anybody that's listening if I'm absolutely butchering this story or butchering any of this, just hit me up with it.
Certainly not experts.
No, definitely not. Never to profess to be an expert in any of this, just trying to work it out as I go along actually and trying to make sense of it all myself. But one of the boys was abused by the dad. And apparently none of that came out in the initial case. So think about that evil. So those boys commit this atrocity, kill their parents. At the time, I remember reading the news about that. I was an adult at the time and thinking, oh, wow, they did all of that for the money and the wealth, you know. But they did that out of trauma. That killing came out of trauma that was delivered by years of abuse by the father, sexual abuse of that son. It's like evil upon evil upon evil. Like you say, the zooming out, it just, and why did that father do that? A normal, healthy together human being does not sexually abuse their precious child. He's obviously had some sort of twisted abuse shit in his life.
Yeah.
So there's generations of this crap. I think this evil is just, I think that possibly could be one answer to why is there suffering? It's because evil is in the world. Mm. And God has given us, the other argument is this free will argument.
Yep.
That we have the free will to make the choices that we make. And if we were to not have free will, we'd be like robots, wouldn't we?
Yeah, and even... like there's almost a subsection of that, like the possibility of God giving us free will, but then still allowing God's self to overwrite that free will.
Yeah, yeah.
Like free will doesn't mean anything unless it actually you're free to make actions and make choices that have lasting consequence. So in the case of that story of the two brothers. The father has free will to commit atrocities. And one way of looking at the world and one theological framework would be that free will goes as far as God being unable to reverse the consequences of that. Because the choice actually has weight and still has consequence.
Yep. And this was my thought on that when I read that section in this book. If God didn't allow us to have that free will, we wouldn't grow into a dependence on God either, and all would just be perfect, wouldn't it? Where is the transformation in that? You know? I like the fact that I've had free will. I like the fact that I've had a life that's not perfect, and that I've made more mistakes, and I've made more mistakes than I've done good things. So many mistakes. And I like the fact that God's allowed me to grow, because with my free will, I've made a choice to grow closer to God, and in doing so have been transformed by that very relationship. But I often wonder, Jonty, had I not had the trauma and I'd grown up in some kind of blissful life with everything beautiful around me, not that I know anybody that's had one of those, I'm just saying. I'm sure if you are one of those, can you reach out and let us know? But I'm really keen if you've had a perfect, beautiful life. I think that dependence on God is powerful and transformative, and I'd much rather be her than the one that didn't get to experience the transformation, because it's richer. I know God beyond a shadow of a doubt as my Lord, my Saviour, my bestie. I know that, and I would hate to not live with that. I would hate to not have had that experience, and only came to the experience of God because of trauma. So I think that might actually be one defense as to why God allows evil and suffering in the world.
Yeah. That's bringing up a few things for me related to, we're in the build up to Easter. We're in the middle of Lent at the moment.
Yep.
And a close mentor of mine has always says all the time that like Christians should be Easter people. Yeah. Like we're people of Easter. And at the heart of the Easter story is deep, traumatic suffering and death.
Yes. Cross, baby.
Of course we get to Easter Sunday and we have the resurrection.
Yeah.
But even the resurrected Christ has scars.
Absolutely.
And like we've said every year that we've been doing this podcast when we go through Easter, like there is no resurrection without first having a death. And that the transformative experience of Easter happens through crushing loss and trauma with the death, followed by transformation and resurrection and new life.
But he gets resurrected, like you said, but he's resurrected, Jesus is resurrected with the scars still on his body. So Easter, we know that Jesus suffered, don't we? He suffered terribly at the cross. He died and then was resurrected. But in that suffering, we see and we read about his hands being nailed to the cross, his feet being nailed, and a spear being jabbed right in his side. Yeah. When he's transformed and risen again, we still see those wounds on him. It's not like he's risen perfectly normal and untraumatized or uninjured. Yeah. He has suffered.
And he makes sure that
everybody knows
about Thomas,
yes,
who cops flack for being quote unquote doubting Thomas.
Yeah,
he's like shows him and makes him touch
the wounds,
the scars.
Yeah, and so the fact that we have this suffering Jesus, our Saviour, that actually is showing us his own wounds in his resurrected self, he's still got wounds. Doesn't that tell us that suffering, our own humanity, our own human plight of suffering is a normal part of this whole creation piece that is to be a human and to have God as our Saviour? There's not that there's something wrong here. It's actually he is the very model of what it is to be human, and that is to suffer. And we will. And, you know, Jonty, in being in pastoral ministry, I get to meet people who have had a very, what I would describe, charmed life. There's some that have had absolutely what looks like a beautiful rocky road, a rockyless road. That sounds yummy, but like a road with not many bumps on it.
Smooth road.
Smooth road, yeah. And then I meet ones that have had really rough lives. And I look at the ones that have had the smooth road in their 80s and they get the first bumps that they've ever experienced. And I'm telling you, that doesn't look good. That looks really scary to be experiencing your first so-called traumas at the end of your life. That to me looks scary because you've had no opportunity to build up any level of resilience along the way. You're learning that stuff way down the track, but that's another story. My point is that suffering happens to us all. I think very few people get to have that complete smooth road if they're honest.
And a big part of the Easter story for me is that while there's solidarity amongst us as human beings in one thing we have in common being suffering, the story of the incarnation is the story of God. Like we can now identify with God in that way as well because God humbled God's self into human form and suffered. Didn't just have a bad day. Talk about a bad day. Like that last 48 hours.
Yeah, rough. Yeah. And he cries out. Like we are asking all these questions. Where is God? Why is it evil? Why is there suffering? Jesus himself cried out, please take this cup from me.
And then why have you forsaken me?
Yes. And my God, why have you forsaken me? On the cross, moments prior to death. Like he's asking the question. Yeah. So I don't think there's anything wrong here. I think it's a part of the rich fabric that life provides for us. It's what we then do with it and what meaning we give it.
Yeah.
And are we able to be transformed by our suffering? Are we able to be like that mother and father of those 4 kids that died? Are we able to be like them and say, I forgive him for what he did? They hold no anger, rage. I'd want to cut them into him into small pieces if he'd hurt my kids. There's no words enough for the level of vengeance that I'd want. Talk about wrath of God.
Yeah.
I would want God to be wrathful in that situation because I don't know if I'd be able to contain myself, Jonty. I don't know how they do it. But yet that's their level of suffering that they have to deal with in this world. We've all got different sufferings that we all have to deal with.
And in responding in that way with forgiveness, I don't know whether or not that family are Christian, but is a very Christ-like. We just mentioned that last day or so of Jesus' life.
Yeah.
Not once does he lash out or fight back or really defend himself.
Yep.
Which isn't a call for us to just be passive and doormats because that's not what Christ is doing there in that final few hours of his life. But it's very much this radical upside down way of approaching suffering and particularly when people antagonize you and there are people who are behind your suffering with intent, deciding not to go back for blood, eye for an eye style. It's like responding with love.
Yeah.
Which you see in the way Jesus acts in the Passion story and in the way that family responded, which is like you read it in the gospel and you go, wow, that's why we follow Jesus. But then you see real life, well, not real life, but you see modern current day reflections of that. And I struggle to wrap my head around
how
someone has that amount of empathy with someone that committed such a horrendous act that has affected you and your family for the rest of your lives. Like to be able to have that amount of perspective to forgive them and show love when they are responsible for something that you live with for the rest of your life.
That's it.
Blows my mind.
We as humans, we're so busy trying to make meaning of things, though, aren't we?
And we're justice orientated as well.
Yeah, we want to know why. Yeah. Why is this? And
we want to even it back up.
Yeah, and we want to cry out to God and ask, why is this going on? Can I read you a little bit from this
please.
book? Talking about this couple were wrestling with questions about the meaning of suffering, life and death as their little girl was dying of cancer. And this is what this minister said. He was just having a ministry of presence and says this: I did not pretend to have any handy theological solution to people's existential dilemmas, but I could be a friend on the way. Many times I listened politely to parents who groped with God in their most painful hour. I respected them for all their journeys, but I heard no convincing evidence in their revelations to challenge my way of thinking. If I were to believe, I always assumed it would require a testimony or reliable witness. And then she finds herself at the bedside of this little girl. And this little girl became sick with leukemia when she was just 2 years old, Jonty. And then in the next few years, she received constant therapy, and there was times when she was disease-free. But at the age of 7, the leukemia had returned with an unforgiving vengeance, and at this time, the little girl was facing the end. And this woman gathered with the little girl's distraught parents and a hospital chaplain to comfort the little girl in her last minutes of life. And she described what happened. Before she died, the little girl mustered the final energy to sit up in her hospital bed and say, "The angels, they're so beautiful. Do you hear them singing? I've never heard such beautiful singing." Then she laid back on her pillow and died. Her parents reacted as if they'd been given the most precious gift in the world. The hospital chaplain in attendance was more comfortable with the psychological than with the spiritual, and he beat a hasty retreat to leave the existentialist doctor alone with the grieving family. Together, we contemplated a spiritual mystery that transcended our understanding and experience. For weeks to follow, the thought that stuck in my head was, have I found a reliable witness? And the witness as to groping, I suppose, with death of an innocent person, an innocent little one dying. And the reliable witness sits up in bed and sees that through that thin veil of what's to come for her. The angels in heaven, And I think that is just, that's just got the thumbprint of God all over it in my brain. And maybe that doctor needed to hear that in that moment. Maybe that for that doctor was a turning point in their life for their discovery about God and their understanding about God. And this little girl's life and death that doctor's made meaning of in this particular way, which may then transform that doctor's life and the generations that come from that doctor. Who knows?
Yeah.
Am I grappling at straws here?
No. And I wonder, there's something in there as well about like we are able to give meaning.
Yeah.
Like we're able to ascribe, and we do every day of our lives, we ascribe meaning to things of our own choice. And so like that doctor had the choice to either be like, that experience confirms to me that like that girl died and so there is no God. Or like the doctor can go, wow, what an incredible experience that affirms X, Y, and Z for me, and that can influence how they choose to go about their work moving forward in a variety of different ways. But we, in the seeming absence of God, up until that moment you described where she sits up in bed, that's the other part of free will, is like we're free to ascribe meaning to things in ways that actually shape our lives. And so when we talk about suffering generally, like we're free to ascribe meaning to the suffering in our lives in a way, in ways that we can choose to either let it transform us, or let it define us and be a full stop. And there's as Christians, we look to the gospel and we look to the story of what God's doing in our lives throughout history, and we can look to pull meaning from that.
Yep.
But ultimately, we've been given that free will to do with that what we will. And you know, I know you've spoken on the podcast before about, and I think from memory, one of our most successful clips on social media is you talking about how your suffering led you to God.
Totally.
And without that suffering and the
Right.
meaning that you, of your own free will, with God,
Yep.
ascribe to that suffering, has led you on a path in your life that you wouldn't have gone down otherwise.
No way.
There's another version of your life where you let that suffering completely dominate your worldview and become a full stop.
Yep.
And I'm sure that
Yep.
was
Well,
very
there was a
much
choice.
an option. Yeah,
there was a choice at one point. Yep.
How much of I'd actually be curious to know and hear you talk about this. How much of that was a choice for you, and how much was that over time? How much was that? Was there a split second thing at one point where you were like, I'm choosing to ascribe this particular meaning to that period of my life, or was it just a gradual over time revealing process? Because and I'll tell people, go back and listen to earlier episodes if you don't know what we're talking about with Ness, but huge suffering and the suffering that for many people is a full stop, and it is like the defining element of someone's life, and you've chosen by the sounds of it. I mean, yeah, unpack that for us.
I think. Well, there was a very defining moment. I was down a rabbit hole of sin and destruction, and my life was not going great. I was having a rough time, but it was God and I intersected. We had a moment. The Spirit just catapulted me in a way that was undeniably a split second God moment. But you know, one of the theories in this book is about all things work together for good, you know, and I wonder if that is what happened in my life, because there was like all these things that happened in succession that worked together for my good, that actually got me to church on this very night that I had this major Holy Spirit event occur, and I gave my life to Christ and my life turned around. But if all those different things hadn't come into play, I wouldn't have been there at that moment. So it was that I believe God was working in through the tapestry of the way that God works in a whole bunch of people's lives to help me get to church that night. You know, unbelievably so. A whole string of things, some good, some bad, that got me there that night. And then the decision for me to move forward was really taken out of my hands, because I had this supernatural explosion up my bum, as I've talked about before, like a firecracker. That wasn't of my doing. And I suppose I could have gone no after that. I suppose I could have, but I felt like it was so intoxicatingly drawing me forward. I never once did I, in that moment after that, did I. It was so overwhelming that I just said yes to it. I think in the suffering, I've got to a place where I've thanked God that suffering occurred and He's been able to work in my life in the way that He has. Been able to work in the way that He has, that I'm able to meet people at junctions in their life where I can have really big, hard-hitting conversations that only other survivors can have with each other, and I can do that from a Jesus perspective. And that suffering, that's being able to talk about your own suffering and listen to somebody else's suffering and be able to resonate with their suffering in a way that's helpful and comforting, I suppose, with an empathy and a lens of knowing. And that's powerful. I'm starting to, the longer I'm in ministry and the more God uses me in these transformative ways, the more I'm seeing it as a part of God's ultimate plan for my life and what he'd probably planned all along. I just wish the anxiety didn't come with it. Paul talks about a thing in his side, a thorn in his side. Yeah, I wish I didn't. I say to God all the time, if we could, you've done these amazing things for my heart. My brain's just another organ, brother. Can we work on that?
Just dial that back by 10%.
Yeah, just 10%. Yeah, like a little bit of the crazy, but not as much. But I think the suffering, the image of the suffering Christ is the image that we need to have and hold. And like you said, Easter, beautiful segue, Jonty. I think we're designed to suffer. We're designed to just we're made in his image, and if he suffered. So that's all a part of the human experience.
Yeah. I think all the way back to, early days of us doing this when we spoke to Graham Long.
Oh, yeah.
And he tells that story of when he was at Wayside, is that right?
Yes.
Talking to a mother who lost her children to a partner who had been abusive, and he had helped her get out of the home and relocate her to somewhere safe, but in the process weren't able to take all of the kids with her, and finding out later that the father had driven the car with the kids into the lake and drowned them, and had the kids, I think it was just one of the kids in a bag weighted down. And
little girl
asking, like, the mother asking him, like, where on earth could God possibly be amidst all of that? And what the Easter narrative, what the Passion narrative tells us is God's in that bag.
With the little girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, God identifies with suffering. And that's what the incarnation is about. It's God made flesh. And flesh, if we're being really pessimistic about it, but I would argue realistic, not pessimistic, flesh equals suffering, and death. Ultimately, our physical selves, it's the laws of entropy, our physical selves are going to die.
Yep.
Our organs aren't meant to live longer than 80 or 90 years.
Yep.
Ultimately, that is what happens to all of us. But that's the hope in the gospel, is that isn't like our physical selves do shrivel up and die eventually, but we're eternal as well. And that's that beautiful, mysterious paradox of the God-man, Jesus, being fully human and fully God, and that promise of eternal life in the new heaven and earth.
Can I wrap with this?
Yeah.
If there is to be a genuinely Christian response to Theodicy, it must bear witness to the ultimate victory of God, to that time when God will wipe every tear from their eye. Death will be no more, mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. And we read that in Revelation 21:4. But it must also bear witness to what God is doing now, in the midst of history, in the middle of pain and suffering, to address evil.
Lots to think about and wrestle with. And we didn't even necessarily plan it to be having this conversation in the middle of Lent, but is I think a really useful and helpful and meaty time of the Christian calendar to be thinking about this.
Yeah.
Do get in touch with us if you have thoughts or follow-ups or questions for us. We'd love to continue this conversation.
And I have by no means done this book justice, but I would highly recommend it. It's an easy read. It's not densely tricky theology on any level, and it's a really provocative, thought process to take you through all those big questions. Yeah, so you can dive yourself, because it's a personal response that you need to grapple with, really. Yeah.
And if you want to grapple with it, with some other people,
with us, join in.
Let us know. Send us an email.
Yeah, I'm still working out what I think. Quite frankly,
yeah,
I really am. I'm trying to work it all out myself.
I think we figure it out when we meet our Creator.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It's a journey that we our physical flesh selves aren't going to, like we said at the beginning, like we sometimes fall into this trap of thinking we can wrap it all up in a nice neat box that we can hold at arm's length and understand, but that's not what life on earth is about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm always wary of theologians that think that they've got the answer to everything.
Yeah.
You know, come on. Who are you, God?
And like even the best, most succinct, most fully fleshed out, hypothetical, intellectual explanation.
Yes.
Even the most comprehensive of those can be undermined by a single conversation with another person.
100%.
With real experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So tell me, what have you been reading or watching?
Yes, I mean, so in terms on the reading front, I spent about a week. I'm still quite unwell, as we've mentioned, but like when I was particularly unwell, reading through the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Do you know about?
Oh, what a lovely light read, brother.
So Stephen King, famous fantasy, science fiction and horror writer. He was massive for me as a teenager, and I've sort of in recent years come back and rediscovered my love of Stephen King. The Dark Tower is like his Lord of the Rings. So there are 7 canon books, and then there's an 8th which came out 10 years after he finished it that kind of slots in the middle as a little interlude novel. Loved it. Super, super meta and weird towards the end. I'd recommend people read the first 3 books if they want to just like get into the Dark Tower. If you go beyond that, it gets Stephen King himself becomes a character in the narrative. So, in terms of what I've been watching, I really wanted to mention I saw this film called Grand Theft Hamlet.
Ooh,
which is a film shot entirely inside Grand Theft Auto Online.
Wow.
And it was made during COVID with a bunch of they're British people decided to try and put on a performance of Hamlet inside Grand Theft Auto.
Wow, what are the sets like?
Well, so Grand Theft Auto Online, which I think is from 2013, it just takes place in I can't remember the city, but it's like you just have the entire digital version of whatever city that game's set in. So at one point they're in like a public amphitheater, but inside.
Would it have been all done with green screen and?
No. So it's literally like you don't see the people.
Right.
You just see the gameplay.
Oh, so you're watching it take
the game.
place. You're watching Hamlet take place within the game.
So what actually ends up happening is it's really a movie about the people trying to put on Hamlet in GTA.
Wow,
so you hear the voices of the real people while you're watching their avatars in the game.
Wow.
And it actually becomes about loneliness in COVID.
Oh, how interesting.
And about how they've got nothing else to do and they're lonely, and so it's about the lengths that they went to just feel community in the middle of COVID.
How do you rate it out of 10?
I struggle to rate it out of 10 because it's so bizarre. Like I've literally never seen anything like it. I've seen movies that take place entirely on a computer screen. Like that's a little subgenre of particularly horror movies. Like something like Unfriended takes place entirely on Skype. But it's the first thing I've seen that's literally you're watching people play a video game. It's like watching a stream, but it's presented like a film. I'd definitely rate it positively, like 7 or 8 out of 10.
Wow, Jonty.
Really loved it. It's super weird and experimental, and it's on Mubi, M-U-B-I, a streaming service. So if you subscribe to that, it's on there. Super interesting. I don't know if I'll watch it again.
I love that you've watched it.
Someone mentioned it, and I was like, oh, wow, that sounds really interesting and bizarre. Where is it? And they're like, oh, it's only streaming on Mubi. And I was like, great, I've got Mubi. So I gave it a watch, and it was really fascinating.
You geeked out for a couple of hours.
Yeah, it was really cool. So if anyone's seen Grand Theft Hamlet is what it's called.
Excellent.
Let us know what you thought. What about you, Ness? What have you been watching or reading?
I've just been pretty densely into this theology because I've just started. I'm in my second week and there's a lot of reading and a lot of synthesizing a thought. So I've been writing notes and I'm prepping to do a big book review and paper. So it's interesting. I'm loving being with this really interesting group of other theologians. I find that really stimulating. Good conversation.
Yeah. Have you been watching anything?
I have watched this show called The Man on the Inside.
Okay. I haven't heard of this.
It's I think it was a 6-part small series shot like little movies. And I'm trying to think of the actor, very famous guy.
What was it called? My phone's filming. I can't look it up.
Hang on. Let me just have a look at it because that would be good. Do we just pause here?
Oh, we can talk through it. Al, if you've listened this long, you can listen to Ness doing a little Google search. So it's 6-part miniseries.
6-part miniseries. The Man on the Inside, it's called.
Netflix, Amazon. Where was it?
Yeah, I think it was Amazon. Man on the Inside. And what he does is it's Ted Danson.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Ted Danson.
Nice. I haven't even heard of this.
Oh, it's just super light. Nothing bad happens.
Yeah.
Because you know me, I can't do all the Stephen King scary stuff. It's either Bridgerton or something lame like this. And it's 2024. And he is an elderly man. His wife's just died of dementia and he's quite lonely. And he gets asked if he would do a job. He's a university professor. And he gets asked if he would go on the inside into a retirement village and try and work out as the undercover cop who has stolen this jewellery, this piece of missing jewellery. And he thinks, oh, that'll be fun. I'll give that a crack. But he has to go in as a resident. So he goes in as a resident and he's just charming and sweet. And it's this relationship between him and the woman that manages resident relationships in there. And he has to negotiate relationships with all the quirky, interesting elderly people within the place. And he realises he builds great friendship with them, and there's a piece that has been missing in his life since his wife has died. It's a really sweet watch. It's funny, it's light. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't have to think hard, and after reading Theology, it's like I could do 40 minutes of something super light and it readied me for bed. Super fun. I'd give it a 6 out of 10.
Very
that's
positive.
all right.
Yeah. That's more than a pass mark.
Was it? Yeah, it was fun. It was just light and effortless and kind. Yeah. Left me happy, giggling. A bit like when I watch reruns of The Nanny. I just have a good cack.
Well, thanks. And if anyone of our listeners, watchers, have anything that they're reading, watching, listening to that they want to recommend to us, please do.
Love a referral.
I'm always looking for things to add to my watch list and read list. So
and you know my genre. It's got to be happy, friendly, and nothing bad happens.
Yeah. That's just about us for this week. To wrap up, we've got some just the usual admin-y things. So live shows. Next
6th
one
of April.
Still coming up, 6th of April. Do register just so we have an idea of who's coming.
Yeah.
With Dr. Ali Robinson as our guest. That'll be great over at Borkham Hills
Uniting Church, St. Matthews.
St. Matthews.
Good venue. Easy parking.
Yeah, super easy to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be more. By the time this one comes out, we won't have the ones after that ready to announce just yet, but we'll be doing at least 2, probably 3 more shows.
Yeah.
Possibly even more. Looking at our schedule, because we've got June, September, and October/November are lined up. We may even chuck in a December show, depending how we go with the end of year stuff. So always keep on the lookout for those. If you want merch, those are the places to get it a little bit cheaper, because if obviously our web store is, if you want to support us, that's a great place to do that. Buy a shirt, buy a cup.
And if you've got a story about your life, about transformation, about suffering and healing, or just an inspirational life story, we'd love to hear it. Reach out to Jonty and we'd love to have you on the show.
Yeah.
Come and share.
Yeah. Well, that goes for particularly our Facebook crew. 100%. If you're not in the Facebook crew, go down to the description, because there's a link for that there where we interact with people in there every week, usually around the episode, but just other stuff as well. It's a good place to hang out and chat.
How do they do a 5-star rating? Because that really helps our algorithm.
Yeah, good question, Ness. We didn't even plan that. Look at us go. Best way to do it, go to Apple Podcasts if you're an Apple Podcast listener. Give us a 5-star review, but even better, if you've got 30 seconds to type up something nice in the review, That goes a long way. At time of recording, there's still a free piece of merch available for the first person who writes one of those. So first one that I see show up, a nice 5-star review, written review.
Beautiful.
We'll get in touch and get you a free shirt or cap. They just really help because the more of those we have, the more the podcast shows up on random people's feeds.
Great. Love that.
To recommend it to other people.
Perfect.
That's a really easy way to support us. There was something else that I was meant to say as well that I've completely forgotten. 150 episodes, that's what it is.
Oh.
So Holy Week is coming up. The Tuesday before Good Friday will be our 150th episode of Filthy Hope.
Whew.
So we would love your questions, stories, any input you want. We'll, depending how we go, we'll do a bunch of audience interaction stuff in our 150th episode.
Amazing.
So if you have any follow-ups from this episode, like we say, or anything else we've done, shoot us an email at filthyhopepod@gmail.com. But we'll also have a thread in the Facebook group where we'll be gathering material or talking points from our audience for the 150th episode.
Great.
That will come out, like I say, just before in Holy Week, which is Tuesday before February, which at that point will be almost exactly 3 years since this podcast started.
Was it just before Easter?
It was the week after Easter was our first episode in 2022.
We were mental.
We were. We still are.
That's crazy.
We still are.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Thanks as always for your support.
Yeah.
Thanks for chatting, Ness.
Yeah, you too.
And we'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.
This is a breath for